Imagine being buried alive up to your neck in the center of a public square while hundreds of people watch. Your head exposed to the scorching sun of feudal Japan, insects crawling across your face, and the only thing you can do is wait. Wait for someone to take pity and use your head as a target for practicing with a bamboo saw. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This was a real punishment applied by samurai in feudal Japan. And what you're about to discover about the samurai justice system will completely transform everything you thought you knew about these legendary warriors. The punishments they inflicted were so brutal, so meticulously cruel, that they would make even today's harshest systems seem like child's play. The samurai punishment system wasn't just about inflicting pain or death. It was about sending a message so powerful, so terrifying, that no one would dare challenge the established social order. And the first thing you need to understand is that in feudal Japan there was an extremely rigid hierarchy where samurai occupied an almost divine position in society. They weren't just warriors, they were the walking law, and they had the legal right called kirisute gomen, which literally means the privilege of cutting and leaving. This allowed any samurai to instantly kill any person of lower class they considered disrespectful, without any legal consequences. Imagine living in a society where crossing the wrong path or not bowing deeply enough could result in your immediate decapitation. But when the samurai themselves committed crimes or dishonored their code, the punishments became true spectacles of calculated cruelty. One of the most shocking punishments was nokogiri biki, which literally translates as sawing with a saw. This was no quick execution. The condemned was buried up to his neck in the ground at a busy intersection, usually in the city center. His head was trapped in a wooden frame, completely immobilized. Next to him was placed a bamboo saw. And here comes the truly diabolical part. Anyone passing by on the street was allowed, and often encouraged, to pick up the saw and make a few movements on the condemned's neck. It wasn't meant to be a quick kill. Each person would only give a few sawing blows before continuing on their way. The process could take days, with the condemned suffering unimaginable agony as his head was slowly sawed by dozens or even hundreds of different people. This punishment was reserved for crimes considered especially heinous, such as treason against the daimyo, or crimes involving extreme dishonor to the Bushido code. But there was something even more meticulous about samurai cruelty, and that was the way they transformed execution into an art of precision. Tsujigiri, for example, was technically illegal, but widely practiced by samurai. It involved testing the sharpness of a new katana or honing cutting techniques using live people as targets. Samurai would wait at crossroads at night and attack unsuspecting travelers, usually cutting them from the shoulder to the opposite hip in a single fluid motion. The goal was not just to kill, but to achieve the perfect cut, and some samurai kept detailed records of how many people they had cut and which technique produced the cleanest cut. There are historical records from the Edo period documenting samurai who practiced tsujigiri on more than 20 people before finally being captured and punished. The punishment of seppuku or harakiri is probably the best known, but what most people don't know are the horrific details involved in this ritual. When a samurai committed a grave offense but still retained some honor, he had the option of committing ritual suicide. But it wasn't simply plunging a sword into his abdomen. The process required the samurai to make a deep horizontal cut in the abdomen from left to right, and then a vertical cut upwards, forming an L or cross. The entrails literally spilled out of the body, and the samurai was expected to maintain absolute composure throughout the process. There was an assistant, called a kaishakunin, whose job was to decapitate the samurai at the precise moment before he showed signs of weakness or excessive pain. But here's the macabre detail. The kaishakunin couldn't completely sever the head. He had to leave a small strip of skin connecting the head to the body, so that it would fall forward onto the chest, not roll on the ground, which would be considered disrespectful. This required surgical precision with the katana, and skilled kaishakunin were highly valued and sought after. There were also specific punishments for samurai who committed crimes considered cowardly or dishonorable in particular ways. The wakizashi, the short sword that every samurai carried alongside the katana, had a sinister purpose beyond combat. It was the tool used for seppuku, but it was also used in a practice called kaishaku, forced seppuku, where a samurai who refused to commit ritual suicide voluntarily was forced to do so while being held down by several men. In some documented cases from the Sengoku period, samurai who deserted in battle were captured and forced to watch as their entire families were executed in front of them one by one, before finally being allowed to commit seppuku. This punishment sent a clear message. Cowardice not only destroyed one's own honor, but tarnished one's entire family lineage. And you, what do you think about this justice system where honor was worth more than life itself? Can you imagine living under such extreme rules? Leave your opinion in the comments. Another utterly terrifying punishment was reserved for those who committed crimes against their feudal lords. It was called haritsuke, and it was essentially a Japanese crucifixion, but with unique elements that made it especially horrific. The condemned was tied to an X-shaped wooden cross, positioned in a busy public place. But instead of simply leaving them to die of exposure or asphyxiation, as in Western crucifixions, the executioners used bamboo spears to pierce the condemned's body in specific locations that prolonged the suffering. They began at the extremities, piercing arms and legs at calculated angles to avoid major arteries. Each piercing was done slowly, methodically, while the public watched. The process could include up to 20 or 30 piercings over several hours before a spear finally struck a vital organ. There are records of haritsuke executions that lasted more than 12 hours, with the condemned conscious for almost the entire process. But perhaps one of the most psychologically devastating forms of punishment was something called rujo, which meant imprisonment for life. It wasn't simply throwing someone into a cell. Samurai who committed certain types of offenses, especially those related to politics or conspiracy, were placed in wooden boxes so small they couldn't sit, lie down, or stand upright. These boxes were then hung in temples or public places, raised off the ground, exposed to all the elements. The prisoner received only enough water to survive and a minimal amount of rice. They defecated and urinated where they were, inside the box, and the smell became part of the punishment. Some of these box imprisonments lasted for months, even years, with the prisoner slowly going insane as their body deteriorated. There are records of one samurai who survived almost 3 years in these conditions, before finally dying of malnutrition and exposure. Samurai also had specific punishments for crimes related to weapons. If a samurai was caught selling or trading his swords, which was considered a supreme dishonor, since swords were seen as the warrior's soul, he could be subjected to a punishment called hamonozim, or blade torture. The condemned was tied to a structure and then cut with knives and small blades in hundreds of superficial places across his body. No cut was deep enough to kill, but the accumulated pain from hundreds of small cuts was unbearable. Salt was often rubbed into the wounds to intensify the suffering. This torture could continue for days, with rest periods allowed only to ensure the condemned did not die prematurely. There was also a particularly cruel way of executing samurai who committed crimes against women or children. It was called kamayude, which involved boiling the condemned alive but not quickly. The process began with cold or lukewarm water, and the condemned was placed in a large iron cauldron. Wood was gradually added to the fire beneath the cauldron, raising the water temperature so slowly that it could take hours before the water finally began to boil. Throughout this time, the condemned was conscious, feeling their skin slowly begin to cook, their nerves screaming in increasing agony. Skilled executioners knew exactly how much fuel to add to prolong the process as much as possible. There are historical accounts of kamayude executions that lasted more than 5 hours from start to finish. The mentality behind these punishments was fundamentally different from anything we can comprehend today. In feudal Japan, the idea of rehabilitation did not exist. Punishment was not about correcting behavior or giving a second chance. It was about maintaining the social structure through absolute fear and demonstrating that certain actions had consequences so severe that the very idea of committing them became unthinkable. The samurai believed that the cruelty of the punishment should be proportional not only to the crime, but to the impact that crime had on the social order. Betraying a daimyo was not just a crime against an individual, It was a crime against the entire structure of society, and therefore deserved a punishment that would serve as an eternal warning to all who witnessed or heard about it. One of the most disturbing practices was the use of entire families as tools of punishment. When a samurai committed treason or conspiracy, it was not uncommon for not only him to be executed, but all the male members of his family, including young children and infants. This was called shizoku danzetsu, or bloodline extinction. The logic was that treason was seen as something that ran in the blood, a hereditary stain that needed to be completely eliminated. Women and girls were often spared direct execution, but were sold into slavery or forced to work in brothels for the rest of their lives, carrying the shame of their family like a life sentence. This practice created such deep fear that many samurai preferred death to the risk of dishonoring not only themselves, but condemning their entire families to fates worse than death. What makes these punishments even more shocking is that many of them were applied not only for criminal reasons, but for extremely minor violations of the code of conduct. A samurai who demonstrated cowardice, even in a situation where courage would be virtually impossible, could be forced into seppuku. A samurai who failed to protect his lord, even if such protection was objectively impossible, faced severe punishment. Samurai society operated under the principle that honor and duty were absolute, with no room for mitigating circumstances or human understanding of limitations. This system created constant and overwhelming psychological pressure, where every action, every word, every decision could potentially result in a horrific death, not only for yourself, but for everyone you loved. If you were shocked to discover how brutally different the samurai justice system was from anything we know today, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating facts about the history of the samurai and feudal Japan that will continue to surprise you.